You're listening to Releasing Trauma, a survivor's podcast. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today, we are talking about how to identify and define trusted and safe people. And not only as adults, but especially as children. With me today is Rylee Tuggle, who is an amazing woman. She has got some great children's books out there that I'm going to let her talk about and some of the work that she does. So Rylee, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure. You know, one thing I've got to say is when I was doing some prep work and stuff, I was on your website and I saw your service dogs and I was like, oh my God, those are the most beautiful dogs ever. They are so gorgeous. But it was kind of interesting because I have a husky and her name is Rylee. I was like, okay, we're fated to meet. So, but, so let's talk a little bit about, I guess let's start with your background a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Okay, so I don't even know where to start. So my background is actually as a board certified behavior analyst. I am, for people that don't know exactly what that is, it's behavior therapy. It can be a little, depending on kind of what angle you're coming from it can be a little controversial. My focus in that is skill acquisition and parent training. And so where we're looking at from that aspect is it is assumed to be a little bit more that it is training autism. And that's a huge misunderstanding of what it is. And that actually has a trauma background in it. I 100% understand where that comes from. If you look at the history of it, it definitely does. And that's not really what it is or what it can be used for. The reason I actually got into it was for staff performance and safety reasons. When you're looking at like big corporations, which is organizational business management or OBM. And so that's really what I got interested in for it was this parent training aspect. How can we as caregivers or adults or even people with trauma or neurodivergences change our behavior to make the environment safer and friendlier for other people? Or maybe I personally didn't like, so I have a history of trauma, which I'll get into next. I don't like how I'm responding to something. How do I change my behavior so that I can make that environment a nicer, safer, friendlier environment for the people around me?
Right.
And so that's really what, if you look at what behavior analysis is or behavior therapy is, a lot of it does come down to parent training, because it's not effective if I can come in and I can make something safer for somebody and the parents aren't able to do it, because that's really what it comes down to. How can it maintain when somebody else isn't there? And so the other side of that is skill acquisition. A lot of times it's looked at as, well, there's a behavior. A kid's misbehaving, there's an issue. It's really not. A lot of times it's a skill deficit. So there's somebody's hitting somebody or they're screaming or there's something. Well, is it a communication breakdown? Is it, hey, I don't like the feeling of my shirt and so I'm taking it off? What is the skill deficit that is causing that behavior? And how do we intervene on that skill deficit? Do we teach them to communicate that? Do we teach them to take space? Do we teach them to do these different things so we never see the behavior in the first place? And so when we look at the Trusted Trio, which is kind of like this book that I wrote, and I'm kind of like, I promise I'll tie all this together in a second. But what I really wanted to do is, in all of my books, is teach these skills for kids and for parents at the same time, but in like this really child-friendly way. And so when we're looking at kind of then my personal story and my personal background, and I have a fairly rare disorder. I think it's like 1 in 200,000 people have it. So it's fairly rare. And I have issues where I will explode. Not a very behavior analytic term, but I will explode. And I won't necessarily know what triggered it. I could be sitting, and I am also neurodivergent. Was like recently diagnosed with unspecified ADD. But I hyperfocus and I will lose track of time. And next thing I know, I am in a medical episode, and I just all of a sudden, it's what it is. It's a potassium deficiency. And so I am on the way of being paralyzed. So I can't really communicate in that moment. So I've had to teach myself the best way to communicate. So I'm not screaming at people, or another thing is passing out in the middle of the floor. Obviously, sometimes they're faster than others, so it doesn't work that way. But how do I kind of communicate that with others? How do we work together to create a safer environment for those things? And so it's a lot of these same skills being tied together. And so with my service dog does alert to my potassium deficiencies, sometimes better than others. It depends on how low the potassium has gotten. And then what he does do is he actually argues with me, which huskies do.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they do.
I wouldn't be able to do another dog. I don't know why. It's a thing with huskies. But also sometimes when I'm in an escalated state with medical episodes, it drives me insane. Like we get into actual arguments, which if you've never argued with a husky, it's highly entertaining. And so that can also set me off sometimes. So we are a cohesive team, but sometimes a little less cohesive. And so when we're talking about trauma and talking about some of like the other things that we're doing within this book that I wrote for kids now, is how do we tie all of that together and be aware that kids with trauma have triggers that we might not be aware of. It might be a smell. It might that they don't even know that is triggering. It could be the smell of a cologne, a smell of smoke. It could be anything. It could be the sight of a certain tattoo or symbol, or it could be the way something sounds. It could be the way something feels. And they might not even know that that's what triggered them in the moment. And so all of a sudden we see this behavior, and to us, it looks like, okay, you're freaking out. And we, as humans, and especially as adults, we want to react.
Yep.
But the problem is that our reaction can make it 100 times worse. And what I've seen a lot, especially in my profession, is that we react in a way that escalates the situation first, and second, almost assumes that the kids have skills that we as adults don't have either. And so that is like another issue that I've seen a lot. So I don't know if you had another question. Sorry, now I just feel like I'm on a tangent, but what I was just going to kind of end with that was, so like a big one skill wise would be the kids start maybe screaming at us because now they're escalated, and it reminds me kind of like road rage. So, a lot of adults, they get cut off, and then maybe that car, you escalate somehow, and then that car maybe yells at you or flips you off or whatever. And if adults don't have the capacity or the coping skills to de-escalate themselves, why do we expect children to have that?
I know. So, so I have 4 kids. I'm a mom of 4. And I always say, if I knew then when I was raising them everything that I know now, completely different ball game. I was a young mom and I didn't have the skills, I thought anybody can be a parent, right? You just love the kid, change the diaper, make sure they don't die. And, but what I didn't have was proper parenting skills. It was yelling at them and, just talking down to them as opposed to talking to them or with them at their level. And, so lots of different things. I mean, I look at the past 30 years and it's like, God, I've made so many mistakes. But I think we all do. And yeah, we, as adults, we expect things from kids that they don't have the capacity. We expect them to know why they did something. And 9 times out of 10, they have no clue. I remember sitting at the table for hours until I finally could come up with something that my parents would buy as far as why I did something. When the truth was, I had no clue. I just did it,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we totally expect things from our kids that they just are not capable of doing.
And I think for us as adults, we don't know why. The other day, for example, something happened and I was upset all day. It took me 10 hours to realize it was because I was embarrassed. I didn't know. And part of it is, especially with a trauma background, right?
Mm-hmm.
The emotions that I grew up with were anger and nothing. Especially when you're looking at kids with trauma. And again, this isn't a personal comment. Like, I do not have a clinical psych or clinical therapy background. So this is a personal comment. This is not a professional one. But I did not have the emotional capacity to understand other emotions. I learned this as an adult. And so they have grown, but like embarrassment was not one I was taught. So if I didn't know an emotion, I went straight to anger. And so I was angry all day and I had no idea why. And finally at 10 o'clock at night, I realized it was because I had been embarrassed earlier in the day. And so people that got kind of caught up in the day got to see on and off sides of anger. And I was like trying to rein it in.
Right.
But at the same time, they got caught in it. And I felt really bad. But at the same time, I had no idea why I was angry on and off all day. And so I'm, an older adult. And so if we're looking at kids that don't have emotional intelligence or emotional capacity, how are they supposed to know what those emotions are? And the other thing we're talking about is I can look happy, right? Or whatever happy means. I can smile, I can laugh. That doesn't mean I'm happy. I could be livid. I could be jealous. I could be embarrassed. I mean, how many times have you laughed when somebody embarrassed you? And you're like, oh, it's fine.
Pretty much all the time.
Right.
You laugh it off and then you get upset about it later.
Right.
Yeah.
So just because a kid is showing something doesn't mean that is actually how they're feeling either. And so that's another piece of emotions, is not just taking everything at face value, and really just kind of looking at like, okay, so what is happening? And really talking to kids when they're calm. That's another piece of that, is not doing it when they're escalated. I mean, have you ever tried, let's say you're road rage, or maybe you got into a fight with a friend or a significant other or whoever, and now somebody goes, well, what happened? Or maybe you were the one that was wrong, not the other person. How much do you want to explain in that moment? Yeah, like you just escalate. You're like, get out of my face.
Yeah. Calm down.
Yeah,
that's
that.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're in the heat of the moment, and this is something I learned, just over the years, because I'm I used to be, the explosive anger.
Mm-hmm.
When I was mad, everybody knew it. And I learned that the best thing to do is just to, go do whatever you have to do to calm yourself down, be alone, go for a walk, meditate, whatever it is. And then you have the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And, whether that's with an adult or with a child or the teenager that you just really want to throttle or, whatever the case may be. Absolutely. You doing it in the heat of the moment it's just not going to solve anything.
Absolutely. And my only advice with that is just making sure the person knows. Don't just walk away.
Right. Be like, I'm going to calm down before I say something that I'm totally going to regret.
Mm-hmm.
Give me some time and then we'll talk,
Yeah. And even making that plan ahead of time, hey, in the future, when everybody's calm, if we have a fight or if I'm upset, I will be walking away so that we don't say anything that we regret. Mm-hmm. And then we'll come back when everybody is calmer or level-headed, or we're not yelling, or however that's worded. Yeah. Just so that there is that plan ahead of time, that everybody is on at least understanding of, or the best way to do it is even come up with a plan together if they are old enough to be part of that, 10 or older. Even an 8-year-old can have an opinion on that. Mm-hmm. Most of the time. Honestly, I've had 6-year-olds be part of those conversations sometimes. I'm going to go, maybe theirs is, I'm going to go sit in my room. They can give you those pieces of that. So yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about, identifying and defining trusted and safe people, especially as children. What does that look like? How do we explain that to our kids? That kind of thing.
So one thing that was really great about this book that I wrote was I did not do it alone. I put it together kind of in this concept of following a lot of ABA or applied behavior analysis principles, but I really did write it, or I had content editors and consultants from Northern Michigan Alliance for Children, which is a child advocacy center from this rural area in Michigan. And I had 2 of their clinical therapists work on it with me. And so we worked together to figure out how they define it for the children that come in for therapy with them. And the way that we made sure to define it is that trust doesn't just mean that you can go to them, but that person is safe, that person safe, and they kind of go hand in hand. So you can't really separate the two. This is probably the hardest definition that we could come up with, that we had to work together, because they're just concepts to an extent. They're not really a single thing. And so the biggest thing that we wanted to focus on was that you don't keep secrets from these people. There's no secrets. That you can have surprises, but there's no secrets. And so these people, you can always go to them. You can tell them anything. That doesn't necessarily mean that they won't get upset, but they're not going to be upset at, obviously, right? Like you said, you might get upset because they broke something, whatever, but they're never going to get mad that you told them the truth. And so it's that they're going to protect you. They're going to make sure that your body is safe. They're going to make sure that you as a person are safe. They're going to, and again, you can't really, as a trusted person, that they're that. And it really came down to, you don't keep secrets from them. Right. You can tell them anything. And so we did make sure that we defined it in there. There's a whole page on that. And then we came up with that we really wanted to have at least 3 people identified that you could go to for anything. And that you made sure that those 3 people knew each other as well. They knew that they were together, like these are your trusted trio, that those trusted trio knew that they were in the trio, that they talked to each other about that. That doesn't mean there aren't other trusted adults, but that those people were in there.
So is it important for the child to identify who they want as their trusted trio, as opposed to, me as mom saying, okay, it's going to be me, dad, and this person, or, whatever the case may be?
It's important that it's a conversation. And I would say to an extent, yes. And that's because one, it's going to be that child feels comfortable and safe with them. So it's once you go over that definition, and you really make sure that person or the child understands what that definition is. Like, we don't keep secrets. That person is there to protect you and keep you safe. They will tell everything to this person, anything you tell us, like it's between this group of you and these 3 adults. Who do you think these people are? And kind of starting it that way. Because if you tell the child that, and let's say something did happen, some sort of abuse, something like that, but that abuser was one of the people you designated, how much trust do they have in you as a person that designated that?
Exactly.
So having them say, okay, based on this definition, what we agreed on, like, you can even start with, do you feel like I'm one of your trusted people? Why? And starting it that way. And then, okay, who else do you think could be one? And if you do need to kind of push it, like, do you think dad would be one? Or do you think grandma? Or do you think whoever you might kind of push into that group? And then, okay, so this is our trio. Who else could you go to, if you needed somebody that you trust? Let's say you were at school. Do you think this teacher is trustworthy? Do you think this person is safe? And kind of pushing it that way so they could kind of start identifying other people. And then there's obviously more places like to go from there. What if you need this? Could you go to this person? If you have an issue with this, who could you trust to go to? And you can always start a conversation that way.
Sure. Wow. That is really cool. So listeners, I will have all of Rylee's contact information and the links to her books, because I think these are really great books that, for just about any parent, really. So, all of that will be in the show notes. If you just go to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up Rylee's episode, that will all be there for you. So Rylee, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today. This has been fun.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I mean, this is, it's great work that you do. Working with applied behavioral analysis is, I can't imagine an easy feat at all.
I love it. So, I mean, it has its days. So
I'm sure. All right. Well, listeners, as always, thank you for listening. If you're listening from one of the app stations, iHeart, Apple, Google, Pandora, whatever the case may be, make sure you like us, follow us, and we'll talk to you in the next show. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a show. Be sure to check us out on our new socials on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.